Chapter 1791. Waylon nodded. Freya got out of the car and entered the courtyard. He drove back to the Hilton Villas and stopped the car. He got out of the car, and then he saw Colton, who was standing under a tree in the courtyard. Colton took down his earphones and asked, "Waylon, do you have to stay so close to Freya?" Waylon stopped in front of him, and a smile broke across his face. "She is Daisy's friend. I don't see anything wrong with me driving her home." Colton crossed his arms in front of his chest and turned his face sideways. "She's not her friend. People will change. Even if she's her friend now, it doesn't mean she will be in the future." Upon hearing what he said, Waylon chuckled. "It seems like you have a lot of problems with her." Colton was stunned, and his face sank. "That cocky woman, I thought only Daisy cared about her, but why must you? Anyway, I just hope you won't help her to gain any strange ideas." "All right," Waylon replied flatly. He lowered his head to loosen his watch and continued. "What kind of ideas are you talking about?" "Forget it. I'm not talking about this," Colton said impatiently. "Just stay away from her." After that, he added, "I don't trust her." Colton walked into the villa. Waylon looked at him and let out a chuckle. Daisy came downstairs, and she was surprised to see her brothers. However, she noticed the atmosphere between them was strange. She pulled a chair and took her seat. "Waylon, Colton, what happened? Why aren't you talking?" Colton took a sip from the soup and said without raising his head, "We shouldn't be talking while we're eating." The corner of Daisy's mouth twitched as she turned to look at Waylon. "Brother, do you think Dad and Mom will see the news?" Waylon popped a piece of chicken into Daisy's plate and said, "I think so." She lowered her head. "Am I causing trouble to the Goldmans?" Waylon squinted and laughed. "Of course, you're not. Do you think the royal family will really do something to our family because of her?" Colton chimed in. "Zenobia is nothing but a clown. Dad and Mom wouldn't even care about her. Nolan and Maisie couldn't care less about this fake news. Besides, if they did something to Zenobia, it would make them look like they were bullying a little girl." Daisy rested her chin on her hand and sighed. "The king must be blinded. I don't understand why he chose to take in a god-granddaughter instead of just recognizing his own granddaughter." She felt really upset for Freya. Waylon looked toward Daisy and asked, "Are you talking about Freya?" Daisy replied readily, "Yeah. Freya is Nala's cousin." Waylon smiled but did not make any comment. Colton chimed in indifferently. Chapter 1792. Daisy replied in a low voice, "Don't pay him any heed. There will always be a few days he will act like this in a month." Colton stopped and turned around. "I'm not deaf, you know that, right?" Daisy shuddered and forced a smile on her face when she saw how dark the expression on Colton's face was. "Daisy, go to your class first. You stay here. I have something to ask you." Colton pointed at Freya. Freya was stunned. Daisy looked at them and asked, "What exactly do you want to ask Freya?" Colton pushed her away and said, "Be a good girl and go back to your class." She walked a few steps forward before turning her head around and said, "I warn you, Colton. Don't you dare bully Freya. If not, you're not going home today." Veins were bulging on Colton's forehead, but he paid Daisy no mind. He led Freya to the back of the building as there were fewer people over there. Freya leaned against the wall, crossed her arms in front of her chest, and asked, "Is there anything I can help you with?" "I want you to stay away from my brother." "What?" She was stunned, thinking her ears had failed her. Colton lifted his eyebrows, and there was no expression on his face. His gaze was so deep that not even Freya could read what was in his mind right now. "I thought I was kind enough to close one of my eyes and allow you to get close to Daisy. But I didn't expect you to be so good that you could even get close to my brother." Freya knew what he was talking about. She took a deep breath and said, "So, you're saying that I have an agenda for getting close to your brother?" He said, "Isn't that so?" Freya let out a laugh and said, Colton, do you have such prejudice against anyone? Do you think that everyone wants to take advantage of your family? The two brothers looked the same, but their personalities were poles apart. She knew Colton did not like her from the beginning, but she did not expect him to have such prejudice against her. Colton did not say anything in return. Freya did not like the way he looked at her. She felt like he was looking at a prisoner rather than a normal person. She averted her gaze and said, I have never thought of taking advantage of your family. Not now, not ever. When she turned around and was about to leave, Colton grabbed her arm. You can be my sister's friend, but you've got to stay away from my brother. Daisy was waiting for Freya outside of the building. After a short while, she saw Freya coming toward her with a dark expression. However, she couldn't see Colton anywhere. She approached her and asked, Freya, what did my brother tell you? Freya turned her face sideways and said, nothing. He didn't say anything. Daisy narrowed her eyes. She knew that Freya must be lying to her. Considering Colton's ways of doing things, she was certain that her brother must be up to something no good. If not, he wouldn't have come to look for Freya. She asked, did my brother scold you? Or did he give you a hard time? Freya chuckled and concealed her emotions. No, really, he didn't say anything to me. All right, we still have a training session. Let's not be late. She then walked into the hall, leaving Daisy alone outside of the building, immersed in her own thoughts. At that moment, Daisy received a news notification on her phone. Hashtag young Mr. Knowles has gone missing. Hashtag Daisy was stunned when she saw the news. At the White Ivy Palace. King William walked into his study room after the meeting was over. He smacked the newspaper on the desk and asked angrily. How is there any possibility that they can't find anything? Keeping his head low, Paul replied, the people in Hanniston didn't want to make a big fuss when they were looking for young Mr. Knowles. Although Hanniston is a relatively small country, it's similar to looking for a needle in a haystack when we're looking for a person. King William threw himself on his leather chair, and his face was grim. The news was released from Hanniston, and now you're telling me that they didn't want to make a big fuss out of it? Paul was tongue-tied. They had made contact with the police department in Hanniston when they sent their people there to look for Knowles. However, they didn't allow the police to announce to the public that Knowles had gone missing. They did not know how the news got out, and they were kind of surprised that someone would be the first to get hold of the news of Knowles' disappearance. Chapter 1793. King William calmed himself down and said, Get me Miss Livingston. Her family has a lot of clout in Hanniston. I think things will be better with the Livingstons' assistance. Paul got someone to make contact with Zenobia. When Zenobia came to the palace, she was fretful. She had seen the news of Knowles going missing as well. However, she couldn't tell if Knowles had gone missing after meeting her uncle or before. If he went missing after meeting her uncle, it would get the Livingstons into unnecessary trouble. She had already reminded her uncle many times, so she was pretty certain that her uncle wouldn't do it since it wouldn't give the Livingstons any benefits if he did that. Knowles' disappearance was too coincidental. It was so coincidental that she began to wonder whether this was all set up by Knowles himself. She knocked on the door and went into the study room after getting permission. Your Majesty, I heard that you're looking for me. King William lifted his head and said, I believe that you're aware of what happened to Knowles, right? Zenobia nodded and replied without any hesitation, I saw it, and I've contacted my uncle. He told me that he'll keep me in the loop. King William let out a sigh of relief. I'll be counting on you then. Please, make sure that Knowles is safe. When Zenobia came out of the study room, the smile on her face disappeared. No matter who did it, she wouldn't let them have it their way. Zenobia came out of the palace and saw a red-haired woman leaning against the car window, chatting with her driver. Her face sank as she walked over and pushed the woman away. Who are you? Her driver was stunned. Miss. When Zenobia saw the woman dressed in a flamboyant and sexy outfit, she scoffed and said, Since when can you people carry out your filthy pimping business outside of the palace? Maggie did not fly into a rage at Zenovia's snarky comment. Crossing her arms in front of her chest, she lifted her eyelids and measured Zenovia. I'm filthy? Then what about you, Miss Livingston? Do you think you're very noble for becoming the third wheel of someone's relationship? Zenovia grew vigilant as she asked, You know me? Of course, I know you. The scandal between you and the daughter of the Goldmans has created such a huge commotion across the nation. You're a famous person right now, so how is there any chance that I wouldn't know you? Maggie chuckled. Then, she handed a card to the driver and winked at him. Sir, feel free to call me when you're feeling lonely. The driver did not dare to take the card. He looked at Zenovia as if he was asking her for help. Maggie turned around and left. Zenovia stared at her driver. What? Don't tell me that you're also into this kind of dirty woman? Not only her father, but even her driver was the same. That's why she looked down on them. The driver did not dare to say anything at all. Zenovia got into the car and slammed the door shut. After the car had driven away, Maggie, who was inside another car not far away, picked her phone up and pressed the recording button. The night in Hanniston was lively. There were all sorts of neon lights on the side of the street, a steady stream of people was walking on the flyover, and cars were passing under the bridge. Several police cars were shuttled in the traffic, and the department store screens showed the latest news, such as the latest investigation of Juno Livingston and the disappearance of the Knowles descendant. Inside the cab, the driver was listening to the news on the radio. The police department suspects that young Mr. Knowles might have been kidnapped, and they are doing their best to search for him. Yarramore has also sent people over to assist the work of the police. We ask all the citizens to keep an eye on their surroundings and contact the police department if they find any suspected traces of young Mr. Knowles. The driver pulled out a box of cigarettes and put one into his mouth. At the same time, a passenger entered his car. The driver looked toward the back through the rear mirror. It was dimly lit inside the car. The man was wearing a mask, so he couldn't see his face. He had put the hood of his jacket on and wore wireless headphones. Chapter 1794. The driver asked, Where to go, sir? Knowles replied, Nest District. The driver started the engine, and the car moved forward slowly. The streetlights from the side of the road threw the car into a limbo of light and dark. When they passed through a police car, Knowles raised his head and looked through the window. The driver was looking through the window as well. He said, This is annoying. A visitor has gone missing like that without any sign. Nearly all of the police officers have been dispatched. I wonder what he has gotten himself into. Knowles tapped his finger on his leg rhythmically. The earphones he was wearing were able to translate whatever the driver said perfectly. Besides, he had spent several days learning the language of this country, so he did not have any issues when it came to a normal conversation like this. Visitor, huh? The driver chuckled, That's what we heard from the rumors. We also heard that he's the grandson of the king in Yarramore. If he really has been abducted, things will turn for the worse. Knowles lifted his eyelids and said, I'm more interested in Mr. Livingston. Mr. Livingston? The driver chuckled again, but this time, Knowles could detect a hint of sarcasm in his laugh. Everyone is surprised at what he has done. But, no matter what he did, he won't go to prison. Knowles squinted. What makes you say so? Why are you so confident that he won't go to prison? Why? They have the best legal team in the country working for them. Even after what he did, they will find a way to get a remission. This is the power of those plutocrats. Everyone in Hanniston knew about the things Juno had done in Yarramore. They knew he was arrested on suspicion of murder. However, if he were to be transported back to his home country for trial, his family would still use the best and most qualified team of lawyers to fight for him in that case and get his sentence reduced. This was a normal phenomenon in their country. After all, this place was the heaven for plutocrats to do whatever they wanted. Knowles placed his hand on his forehead and leaned against the window. After a short while, he said slovenly, I doubt so. He recalled his conversation with Chavi, Juno's brother, in the hotel restaurant the other day. Chavi's face sank as he asked, "Are you threatening me with my brother?" After knowing what he said through the translator, Nolace picked up his cup calmly and said, "I'm not threatening you. In fact, I just want to make a deal with you." Chavi's assistant translated Nolace's words for him, and Chavi was stunned. "Make a deal with me?" "Yes. I've gone through your background before coming to Haniston. You're clearly more outstanding than your brother, but you can only live under his shadow." Nolace smiled. Chavi was startled and rose to his feet in rage. "What the hell are you talking about? I know his secret, and I'm sure you know about it as well." Nolace said calmly as he looked straight into Chavi's eyes. "You're helping him to settle his mess, because you don't want to bring disgrace to the Livingstons. But has your brother ever considered you or your family? He was arrested in Yarramore not because he's suspected of murder but also of prostitution. Once these scandals are made public, do you think those people who are dissatisfied with him in Haniston will protest or not?" Chavi froze, his face dark. It was exactly because Juno was the eldest son, so their parents had more expectations of him. Not only did he attend a prestigious university, but he also could become one of the board members of the company after he graduated. His parents had put a lot of effort into nurturing him. His father would only tell him to support his brother. He never told him to learn from him. No matter how outstanding he was, he would be the one to get punished whenever his brother got into a problem, as his father felt it was his fault for not doing his job in supporting his brother. Chapter 1795. Chavi took a deep breath and sat down. "What do you want, young Mr. Knowles?" "What I want is simple," Nolace said as he put down his cup. "I want your brother to stay in prison for the rest of his life, and I want you to take over the Livingstons." Chavi didn't say anything. Nolace rose to his feet slowly and continued. "I'll give you time to consider it. Whether or not you want to continue to live under your brother's shadow or take everything into your hands. This is your only chance. I believe you can do it." Soon, the cab stopped on Nest District. After paying the fare, Nolace got out of the car and pulled his phone out to receive the copy of the recording that Maggie had sent him. Meanwhile, at Chavi's private mansion, he was sitting in his study room alone, massaging his temples. His secretary pushed the door open and entered the study room. "Sir, Mr. Lestrange is here." Patterson Lestrange came into the room, and Chavi's secretary left the study room while closing the door. Chavi invited him to sit down and poured him a cup of tea before asking meaningfully, "Mr. Lestrange, how is my brother's case going? Is everything fine?" Patterson replied, "Don't worry, Mr. Livingston. Miss Livingston has given us the order, and we'll do everything we can to help your brother. We're going to do everything we can as a team to get a reduced sentence for him by turning his case of intentional homicide into a case of manslaughter." Chavi was stunned and put the cup down. "Is this what she told you?" Patterson nodded. "Yes." Chavi handed the cup to Patterson, lifted his eyebrows, and asked, "What if I want you guys to lose the case?" When he put the cup down in front of Patterson, it was as if he was making a move in a chess game. He was decisive and stern. Patterson looked at him in shock. It had been 4 days since Nolace went missing, and there was still no news of him. Daisy stood in front of the window, staring blankly at the heavy rain with her mind in a muddled mess. Waylon pushed the door open and came into her room. When he saw Daisy, who looked dejected, he shook his head and sighed. "Daisy." Daisy turned her head around to look at him. "Brother." Waylon stopped beside her and raised his hand to caress her head. "I know you're worried about Nolace, but considering his capabilities, I doubt he would let any accident happen to himself. After all, he could even survive the car accident several years ago. Besides, Nolace was not someone who was driven by impulses. Without an objective and a plan, he would never go to an unfamiliar country alone. Since he went there, it meant he had finished doing all the preparation that he needed to do." Daisy leaned on his shoulder and said, "But no one can predict an accident. What if something really happens? Chapter 1796. However, a disagreeing voice appeared out of nowhere. But Mr. Knowles has disappeared in Hannahston. Isn't this a little too coincidental? Rumors have it that Miss Livingston has always wanted Mr. Knowles to marry you, so I wonder if the Livingstons know about this matter? That implied that because Knowles had refused to marry her, it was very likely that the Livingstons had detained him after arriving in Hannahston. Zenovia's expression dimmed, and a hint of gloom flashed across her eyes as she looked at the female reporter who had just spoken. What are you talking about? The female reporter sounded very firm. We only aim to get to the bottom of this issue. So are you saying that you're suspecting the Livingstons? Zenovia put on a smile, but there was not even a trace of hilarity in her eyes. The Livingstons would never do such a thing. I can guarantee that in the name of the king's god-granddaughter. Zenovia asked her secretary to send those reporters away and walked into the Sunrise Hotel with a sulky expression. The two stainless steel doors closed slowly as she stood in the elevator, and her hands clenched involuntarily. Knowles must have deliberately directed the public's opinion toward the Livingstons. His disappearance must be part of his plan. But I won't admit defeat. I want him to know that even though the Livingstons are inferior to the Goldmans, we're by means of family that he can bring down so easily. She stepped out of the elevator and saw a familiar figure leaning against the wall. His head was lowered, and he was scrolling through his phone. That figure and facial outline, I saw him at the restaurant the other day. He's the eldest young master of the Goldmans. Zenovia stepped forward. Why are you here, Mr. Goldman? Colton turned and glanced at her. He knew that Zenovia had met Wayne before this and that she had regarded him as the eldest that she had seen the other day. I'm here to show you something. Zenovia was puzzled. Colton took a waiter's employee card out of his pocket, dangled it on his finger, and swung it in front of her. Does this look familiar to you in any way? Her expression turned stiff, but she remained calm. I don't understand what you're trying to say, Mr. Goldman. You don't have to understand me. Colton fiddled with the card in his hand with an unconcerned expression. That man has told me everything. Zenovia's shoulders trembled. Are you planning to threaten me with this incident? He's clarified the matter. If he suddenly changes his mind, do you think the public will believe in what he says this time around? She then smirked. After all, I can also claim that you two have joined forces to slander me. Colton's eyes looked cold, and he scoffed abruptly. Are you challenging me? Do you really think you're so smart that you can place yourself above everyone else? Why would I care if others believe him or not? Zenovia was on the verge of crushing her teeth. Mr. Goldman, the recent incidents aren't something that will do you Goldmans any good. Aren't you afraid that those rumors will backfire on the Goldmans if you lay a finger on me? She was referring to the rumors that claimed the Goldmans were so conceited that they were not taking the royal family seriously. Colton looked at her and remained silent for a bit. Whatever, the Goldmans don't care about that. Zenovia felt extremely nervous subconsciously. So, are you people planning to light the future of the Goldmans on fire just because of Daisy? Colton crossed his arms, and his expression was unchanged. Then, has the king made a move on the Goldmans for you? Zenovia was startled. I can guarantee you that the king won't go to great lengths to offend the Goldmans for a god-granddaughter who's not even related to the royal family by blood. That's because before the king does so, he'll still have to consider the Hathaways' existence. That's why the Goldmans have never taken any of your means seriously. Colton stopped in front of her and looked down at her embarrassed expression. The public will soon come at you. After he left, Zenovia rushed into the room and smashed her handbag on the couch in wrath. Damn that fucker. Her handbag touched the remote control accidentally, and the big television screen suddenly lit up, and a piece of news followed that. According to the latest update, Miss Zenovia Livingston might be the one who's come up with the necklace theft in order to direct the blame at the Goldmans. Chapter 1797. An insider submitted the surveillance footage from the banquet from the other day to the police, and it shows that the waiter and Miss Livingston were very close before the banquet started. It also shows that the waiter grabbed Miss Goldman's clutch when he collided with her. So, it's suspected that he placed something into the clutch, and it's clearly recorded in the footage. The video was posted onto the internet just 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes ago? It was around the time when I met Mr. Goldman. Zenovia's body swayed, and she propped her arms against the back of the couch chair to find a firm foothold. The surveillance footage from that day? I hired someone to delete it. Even if the police were to get their hands on the footage, it would be impossible for them to find evidence. How did the deleted surveillance footage get restored and even leaked onto the internet? Could it be that Mr. Goldman has the ability to do this? After the incident had encountered a plot twist, the controversy became even greater, and when the news was combined with what Daisy had said in front of the media a few days ago, everyone got to the bottom of the incident. It turned out that it was not that the Goldmans did not respect the royal family, but that Zenovia had been acting arrogantly around the country because she had become the king's god-granddaughter. The Goldmans could not stand her attitude. Who would believe this was a drama that was schemed by Zenovia herself? She even did so to direct the blame at the daughter of the Goldmans to defame her. The public speculated whether it was the intention of the king. After seeing the news, King William put down the tablet and waved at Paul. Paul stood at the table and nodded. "Your Majesty." King William put on his glasses, picked up some documents, and flipped through them. "Get someone to make an announcement. Zenovia is indeed my god-granddaughter, but that doesn't mean she can interfere in anything as a royal." Paul was astonished, but he nodded swiftly. "Understood." Soon, the royal family announced a piece of news, and this news managed to make it into the list of trending topics on the internet in just a few hours. The announcement released by the royal family was equivalent to the king's thoughts, so it made everything very obvious. He had taken Zenovia in as his god-granddaughter because he appreciated her ability. Still, it did not mean that he had given her the highest authority in the country that the royal family members had. In other words, Zenovia did not represent the royal family, she was only a VIP from Haniston. It also meant that an outsider had no right to interfere with anything using her relationship with the royal family. These clarifications from the royal family smacked Zenovia vigorously in the face. Zenovia's reputation was ruined by a few continuous events in just one day, and she was even awarded the biggest laughingstock of the year title by the netizens. The next day, at the college, Daisy was worried about Knollys, so she was not in the mood and did not pay much attention to the news at all. She wandered aimlessly and slowly on the campus until her phone vibrated. She looked down and was stunned. It was a text message from Knollys. She called the number immediately, and the other party actually picked up the call. When she heard his voice, a smile appeared instantly on her face. "Knollys?" Knollys spoke slowly. "Daisy, I'm sorry for making you worry. They said you've gone missing." Daisy's voice was trembling, and a sense of irritation surged from the bottom of her throat and assaulted her nasal cavity, making her feel like crying. "You promised to reply to my messages, but I haven't seen any of your replies in days. Do you know that I'm worried to death?" He coaxed her from the other end of the phone call. "I'm sorry, Daisy, this is all my fault. I've not gone missing. It's just that I couldn't get in touch with you just yet. I have something to accomplish." "Then why are you contacting me now?" Knollys gave off a deep chuckle. "Yes, I'm contacting you now, because I was afraid you'd worry too much about me, and you'd cry." She choked on her saliva and whispered, "I didn't cry. Daisy, I've only contacted you now." He added in a warm tone, "There are some agendas that I have to resolve, and I'll return when I'm done. So, please keep this phone call secret from anyone." Chapter 1798. Daisy stopped. "Are they dangerous?" "Don't worry. I won't let myself get into trouble. All you need to do is to wait for my return." Daisy took a deep breath. "Knollys, you have to promise me that you'll come back in one piece." He responded with a light hum. You have my word. After finishing the call, Daisy pressed her phone against her heart. Ever since the moment she heard Nala's voice, her restless heart finally calmed down. Daisy. Freya walked toward her. Daisy turned around and asked with a smile, "Why are you so slow?" Freya sorted out the contents of her backpack. "I forgot to bring my laptop along, so I went back to grab it." She thought of something, lifted her head abruptly, and stared at Daisy. "Why are you suddenly in such a good mood?" Just as Daisy was about to say something, Nala's request flashed across her mind, so she scratched her head and explained casually, "I saw the news saying that the tables have turned for Zenobia, so I'm happy." She nodded. "Then congratulations to you and the Goldmans. You've finally been proven innocent." She then paused for a few seconds and said, "By the way, don't worry too much about No Lace. I believe that he'll be fine." Daisy smiled brightly and answered without any hesitation, "Yes, I believe in that too." Freya did not know how to respond. On the 5th day of Nala's disappearance, Chavi received a mysterious email on his laptop. In the video, a man whose head was covered with a hood and whose hands were tied up was wearing the same clothes No Lace wore the other night when he came to see him. The man standing beside him was wearing a mask of a monkey and body armor, had a gun in his hand, and wore a voice changer on his collar. "Mr. Livingston, I believe you should have received this video if you're watching this. Now let's talk business. If this young master of the Knolls were to be unfortunate enough to die in Hanniston, it must be very detrimental to you and the Livingstons, mustn't it? But don't worry, I don't hold any grudges against the Livingstons. The person I want to be ruined is your brother, Juno Livingston. You should know very well what he's done. I want you to announce all his crimes to the public. And remember, I want to see the announcement by noon tomorrow, or else." The man pointed the gun at Nala's head. "I'll put a bullet through his brain. As long as this young man dies, you Livingstons won't be able to get away with this." The camera blacked out instantly. When Chavi finished watching this video, his back was drenched in a cold sweat. At that moment, his cell phone rang, and it was a call from his father. He picked up the call. "Father." Elder Master Livingston's tone sounded furious. "Chavi, what the hell is going on with that video?" Chavi was astounded and stood up immediately. "You've received it too?" Elder Master Livingston snorted. "No matter what, you must handle this matter well. After all, it's related to your brother's reputation. Your brother will be repatriated back to Hanniston tomorrow. So, get this issue resolved as soon as possible, and don't let that bastard get what he wants." "Father, what do you mean by that?" Chavi was startled. "What do I mean? You should understand what I mean best. Chavi, how can we, the Livingstons, be threatened by some unknown thugs?" Elder Master Livingston added solemnly, "The kidnappers might have captured the young master of the Knolls, but it has nothing to do with the Livingstons. Even if he were to die here in Hanniston, Yarramore's royal family would have no evidence to push all the blame onto us. What you have to do now is to protect your brother's reputation and leave those low lives to the police. Even if something happens in the end, it's the police's problem to handle as they can't save the young man in time. Do you understand me?" The call ended abruptly. The secretary walked to the door, heard a huge commotion coming from inside the office, and hurriedly opened the door. Mr. Livingston, Chapter 1799. The floor was a mess, and there was a broken cell phone on the floor. Chavi removed his tie, stood in front of the French window with his arms in akimbo, and took a deep breath. This is fucking ridiculous. His father had not called to ask about him, all he was worried about was his brother's reputation. His secretary carefully cleaned up the mess on the floor and placed everything back on the desk. Chavi turned and looked at the secretary. "Notify Mr. Lestrange to come and see me, now." At Nest District, the villas located on the hillside were scattered and dense, and the terrain was very high. Standing on the rooftop, one could overlook the buildings under the hillside and the skyscrapers located in the city center in the distance. Sitting in front of the coffee table on the rooftop, Knowles picked up the teacup, meticulously scrutinized its color and smell, took a sip, and enjoyed the taste of the tea. He was wearing a very simple-looking, clean, white cotton and linen shirt. The fabric looked very ordinary, as if it was old clothes that had been washed many times, and the rough needlework and threads were already protruding. But even though it was such an ordinary attire, when it was on Nolle's body, it still could not hide his noble aura. A teenager about his age walked up to the coffee table with a bag full of beer and sat down. His father then brought a few dishes to the table. "Here, make sure you treat your friends well, don't be lazy." After saying so to his son, he smiled at Knowles and said, "Nolly, if there's anything that you want to eat, just let Gideon know. Make yourself at home." Knowles nodded. After his father left, Gideon opened a can and gulped some beer to calm himself down. "I must have lost my mind when I chose to threaten the Livingstons with you. Will they kill me because of this?" Knowles chuckled. "I won't let them locate you. You don't have to worry about that." Gideon leaned forward and asked, "Then, bro, can you teach me some hacking techniques? The way you operated the other day looked really cool." He responded with a faint hum. "Come to Yarramore and look for me when you graduate from college. I'll teach you when the time comes." The corner of Gideon's lips twitched. "He's about the same age as me, but he looks more mature than I am. Is it because he's already gone to college while I'm still struggling in high school?" Nolle's phone screen lit up, and Gideon's keen eyes shifted over onto the screensaver and saw that it was a photo of a girl. "Bro, is that your girlfriend?" Knowles did not even lift his head. "Yeah. When you get to meet her in the future, you should address her as your sister-in-law." Gideon was bewildered. "But I'm about the same age as you." Knowles asked in reply, "Aren't you the one who started calling me your bro first?" Chapter 1800. He's been living in his brother's shadow all his life, and he finally has the opportunity to take over now. Once Juno Livingston is commuted or even released, all the power he owns will return to him. Everyone has a devil trapped deep inside their hearts, and the factor that releases the devil depends on the situation he's in and the benefits that he gets from the situation. Chavi Livingston has contributed so much to the Livingstons, but he can only stand next to Juno Livingston all this while. So, will he accept his status willingly? The last straw that breaks the camel's back is never someone irrelevant, but the people closest to him. Later that night, Chavi was sitting in the study, looking all lonely and depressed. In his hand was a photo of him with his elder brother when they were young. "Ever since we were kids, I've always been the one who accommodates and caters to Juno's needs. Instead of being an inseparable younger brother, a shadow would suit my existence better." After a moment, he seemed to have made up his mind, and his gaze looked sharp and ruthless. He lit a lighter and burned the photo. He let go of the photo as the flames engulfed it, and the photo fell into the ashtray as the smiles in the photos got turned into ashes. The next day, Juno Livingston had been transferred to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs by the police yesterday afternoon and was about to be sent back to Hanniston for a judgment. All media reporters in Hanniston had been waiting at the airport after receiving the news. The scene was comparable to that of fans gathering at the airport, trying to catch a glimpse of their idol when they arrived. Knowles and Gideon sat in the car not far away, looking at the crowd at the airport gate. The situation was put under control when the guards arrived at the scene to maintain order and opened a passage. It did not take long before Juno was escorted out of the airport by the police. All the reporters dashed forward, hoping to get a few questions answered, and all the cameras were facing Juno. Throughout the whole time he was detained in Yarramore, he had experienced a lot of vicissitudes, and he seemed to have lost a lot of weight. He ignored all the reporters' questions and got into the car with the police, but the reporters never let go of the opportunity to take more pictures. At the same time, because he was Juno's younger brother, Chavi was also stopped by heaps of reporters when he attended a conference. The reporter asked him about Juno, but Chavi did not avoid the cameras. On the contrary, he smiled at the cameras and said, "Regarding the news that revolves around my brother, I'll give the media a satisfactory response when the time comes." And I believe that my brother is innocent. Xavi's interview was broadcast on various platforms. Knoles propped his hand against the side of his forehead as he stared at the laptop screen. He could not see any trace of sincerity in Xavi's eyes, and his smile looked fake, not to mention that the word innocent that came out of his mouth sounded extremely mocking. Gideon glanced at him through the rearview mirror and shuddered. Bro, what's with the smirk of yours? Knoles lifted his gaze. Because we'll be able to see the results we want to see very soon. At the Sunrise Hotel, the secretary walked up to Zenobia and lowered his head. Miss Livingston, the president has landed safely in Haniston. Zenobia swayed the red wine glass in her hand, and her eyes were fixed on the wide lawn outside the window. Compared to the time when he was detained in Yarramore, it's better for his father to return to Haniston. As long as he's in Haniston, his secrets will be played down over time and eventually be forgotten. The secretary looked up at her. Miss Livingston, why don't you go back to Haniston as well? Zenobia froze in place, lifted her eyes, and glared at him sternly. Are you looking down on me? That's not what I meant. The secretary almost lost his mind for a moment. I'm just listing out all the options for you, after all. You're in no position to teach me what to do. Zenobia interrupted him before he could finish his words with a sullen expression. I haven't lost, so what if the king has made the announcement? He's only afraid the Hathaways will join forces with the Goldmans.